when we strip everything back, with everything we do, it comes back to the question of, can this make Ethereum safer for the users?
Jim, welcome back to another episode of Behind the Screen with Gramajo, the podcast where we unravel the untold stories of the best on-chain builders and creators. I'm your host, Gramajo, an avid crypto enthusiast that's been in the space since 2012. So this week I sat down with Conor from Enscribe. Enscribe is a really cool product or tool that's basically further pushing the whole idea of ENS, about naming smart contracts, bots, really anything else, not just your wallet, which is super simple, but like very empowering once you see like the user experience or user interfaces. Once they support this, it's going to really unlock and make it feel more human for us. It's very powerful stuff. Before we dive in, I wanted to also take a moment to thank the ENS DAO community. They've been really like welcoming into like sitting down with me and wanting to chat. So that would include Maurice from the Fluid Key team, Kat from the Namespace team, and now Conor. They've all, everyone's been very welcoming, and they've been great about, wanting to talk about how ENS DAO is really changing how we interact with crypto on an everyday basis. So hope you enjoyed this episode. Let's dive in. So I wanted to kind of dive into who you are. Obviously, feel free to dox yourself as much as you'd like. And how did you get into Web3?
So it's going back to 2016, basically. I had been working, I'd broken out of the corporate world, which I'd spent far too many years in, always been a technologist. And I escaped at the end of 2015, worked on a somewhat optimistic startup with some people trying to redo mortgages in the Australian home loans market, which is a pretty closed place, unless you've got a big balance sheet. And after sort of 6 months of realizing it wasn't going anywhere, I stumbled across Ethereum. I'd always been kind of aware of Bitcoin, but it never really captured my interest as much, just because it was always the Bitcoin narrative back then anyway was certainly about this, this digital money system, whereas Ethereum had this kind of distributed computer narrative about it, or the world computer, whatever you want to say it. And that just captured my attention. I've been like a massive fan of Linux going back to like the 90s and early 2000s, and the kind of that view of it being such a transformative technology really reminded me of Linux back then, in that it was just like this community of hackers working on this thing, that everyone loved. And there was of course the Ether, the cryptocurrency associated with it. And actually the first project I did was to build a mining rig. I was like going around Gumtree, which was like the buy and sell place in Australia, and just trying to find people who are trying to like offload like their old like graphics cards to pick them up, and then went and bought the stuff to build like a metal mining rig, and did that, and we went along to the Sydney Ethereum meetup and met some of the other people in the community, and talked about building a mining rig, and randomly like the Sigma Prime team were there as well. They had their mining rigs, and it was just kind of fun back then. But as I liked the whole ecosystem, and I liked what it stood for, and really just started thinking about other things I could do in it. And I'd spent, back then anyway, you had Digital Asset. They were like, they were probably the big kind of venture-backed play on the scene, talking about the transformative potential of blockchain and how, it's going to completely change financial services. And I'd spent a lot of time in that world. I'd been building on the Java and the JVM for many, many years, and I'd seen how much infrastructure is built on that. And something that I noticed was a very clear gap was that Java developers didn't have an easy way to work with Ethereum. So, and this is, I think it was in sort of August, September 2016, I authored a library called Web3J. And that was kind of, I guess, my first proper contribution to the ecosystem, and things kind of went from there. I can kind of continue on this journey, but that's how I first got into Web3. But a lot's happened since because I've been working on it every day since.
Yeah, no, that's epic. I think it's with it hitting its 10 years and the types of people that it attracts, like there's a lot of overlap, especially like you said with the Linux community. Like I also like Linux as well, big supporter of it. Haven't been involved with Linux since not that long. I would say maybe 4 or 5 years ago when I started building my home lab here at home. I started liking and really diving into Linux, and like that it's actually, it looks like it's getting like a bit of a renaissance, or like people are like really digging it again, which is great. But fantastic. So you're from Australia. So I know you're currently building Enscribe. Is that like the best way to say it?
Yeah, I call it Enscribe,
Enscribe,
but
okay.
putting the ENS for emphasis, especially when we first launched.
Yeah.
It was really obvious that there's a connection with ENS there.
Enscribe. Okay, there you go. That's the best way to that sounds more fluid actually. So I was emphasizing it too much, but yeah, like what is Enscribe, and when did you get this idea, like to build something like it?
So Enscribe, we have a very simple goal, and that's to see hexadecimal smart contract addresses eliminated from the Ethereum user experience. And off the back of that, really our broader mission is to make Ethereum dApps safer for users by virtue of that. The real idea for Enscribe actually came to me off the back of being at DevCon last year in Bangkok. I've been to a number of DevCons over the years. I think the first one I went to was at DevCon 2 in Shanghai, as I was living in Australia back then. But now I'm back in London. But I think it was just that I hadn't been to the one a couple of years before that, and I'd been to Osaka. So was that DevCon 4 maybe, no 5 anyway. I think the point was it was getting out there, chatting to people, just having some headspace to really think about Ethereum and so on. In the kind of the last 5 years or so with my company Web3 Labs, which I did start back in 2017, we kind of been relying on consulting revenues, trying to keep Web3J going, and then we have a block explorer called Chainlens that we built. But I think the challenge was that we really weren't the only explorer in town. We've got like Etherscan, Blockscout. They've definitely kind of cemented that position, I'd say, there. And whilst we have customers for it, it didn't kind of excite me in the way I wanted to feel excited. And look, I feel like the biggest way you can give to the Ethereum ecosystem is solve a problem that other people aren't solving, or find ways to accelerate a problem. And something that just kind of struck me, and actually I think part of this was from some conversations I had there, with people, but it was this idea that I remember probably 10, 15 years or so ago when I first played around with Heroku, which was like one of the original web platforms for just deploying apps. What you do, you type like a Heroku deploy command, I think, on a CLI, and what it would do is like package up an app and then deploy it to, be like a few words sort of tied together, like your awesome app.herokuapp.com. And I thought, why don't we have something similar to that for Web3 apps? Like we're in this crazy place where we have the ENS protocol, and there's kind of this inevitability. Everyone feels that ENS will replace hex addresses, but then it's been going for 8 years, and no one seems to be using it for smart contract naming. And I just thought, surely when people talk to smart contracts, they should be seeing an ENS name. If you saw before you sign a transaction, this is from uniswap.eth, then you're going to have a bit more confidence it's the right contract instead of just some hexadecimal, and then it's hosted on the uniswap.org domain. And so that was kind of the inspiration. It was this idea of how can we have this Heroku-like thing where you can deploy contracts and suddenly it's got a cool name. And Enscribe came off the back of that. I think within the team, we really started thinking more deeply about it at the end of last year, and then beginning of this year, sort of sketching down our ideas in a white paper and just trying to think about this kind of contract naming piece, and also really understanding the lay of the land on the ENS side. we had kind of been associated indirectly with ENS for a number of years because the Web3j library, which I wrote back, all those years ago, we've always supported ENS ever since. I think it was in 2017. I added the initial support to it, and then whenever there were big changes being made there, the team would get in touch, and so we've always kind of been aligned with them. But I think that the thing here was that how can we start accelerating the naming of smart contracts, and that was kind of where Enscribe came from.
Yeah, no, it's like when I saw that you were building this on Twitter, I think that's where I ran into it at first. It clicked so quickly. I was like, man, like, how has this not been a thing in the past? Like, I think about it like kind of constantly too with like AI and smart contracts, like you said. Like with WorldCoin, we want to like verify, that you're speaking to a human. And I was like, I just want to verify that I'm speaking to the right like agent or bot or thing that's like out in Web3 to make sure it's a legit one. And it reminded me a lot of like back in the old Bitcoin days, people used to sign their commits with like their PGP key. So you were able to verify that like, hey, like this is actually the right. Obviously if the PGP got compromised, then then you're effed. But for the most part, it was like a digital signature saying like, hey, like this is actually me and this is like the legit version of the code. And you would sign off on that with like a blog post or your code commit or whatever. And so I remember like learning, that was like the first time I ever got exposed to that kind of thinking where it was like, okay, trust by verify, So it was like, okay, so I was downloading a new like software for some Bitcoin thing that I was doing. And it was like, you had to like go to some key register and check like what they submitted it with actually matched and was like a valid one to the original creator. Obviously that's a very technical, like kind of janky solution. So I'm like, when I first got involved with like, when I decided I wanted to get involved with ENS DAO more, the thing that excited me was like, hey man, I'm done with like hex addresses, like, or even just long text addresses. Like I've made mistakes with Bitcoin like 12 plus years ago doing stuff like that. And ENS, when I first like found out about it and everything, like it all just clicked. And then with this, it just makes a ton of sense. Like I think of BankerBot, like BankerBot's so popular on the base ecosystem. And I would love nothing for, BankerBot to have like a little check mark or something to be like, hey, you are interacting with like the legit bot. Or even like token launches, like I have a couple tokens that I have, and I know I tagged you with the Clanker team with Dish, and I was like, hey, I'd love to name my token, so it's like more, you could see it, like you said, it's not like this weird address and you're like, I don't know if that's the right token or not. Like now it would just say like I can name it token.gramajo.eth, and like now it's like, assuming gramajo.eth didn't get compromised on my side, like you can kind of be rest assured like that's my token, because it's attached to my actual ENS. Yeah, so it's a great thing. Can you share kind of some, because I think you've been live now for a couple months, or have you been live for a little bit longer, like than a year?
So we kind of only launched officially in March time, and that was kind of when we came out the woodwork. So it's still early days for us, but I think there's two kind of sides to this. One is almost the meme of naming your contracts, in that we just want to get people thinking about this. I think as you were saying, it's seems like a clear thing we need, but it's also feels like it's kind of like a blind spot that permeates throughout the the ecosystem, and that people have got so accustomed to signing transactions with hex contract addresses, they don't give it another thought. But once people start to get used to it, then there will be that sort of snowball effect. But when you're coming out and you're not going for a token incentive, you're just trying to take technology that's established, it's proven. ENS has been around for years. I think it's very widely supported and embraced by the ecosystem, but it's turning people on to this opportunity for contracts. you've got to capture attention, and that's kind of the slow burn where it's about just keep putting out regular updates in terms of what we're up to, building our following via the channel, so we can build a legitimate community rather than trying to do some sort of token gated quests where which projects who are launching tokens obviously going to go towards, but it's trying to really capture the attention that way. But then on the other side, it's building out the technology for this as well, because there are technical challenges with this. For instance, the ENS app, which people generally use for working with their ENS names, that's very much so optimized for accounts. It wasn't designed for smart contracts. And so these are kind of the areas where we're really thinking about. It's building that infrastructure, but it's also just trying to plant the idea in people's heads and just keep banging that drum, saying name your contracts over and over again. And eventually it sort of, it starts to catch on.
Yeah, I know you mentioned, I think I saw it on your Farcast or maybe your Twitter or both, but you were saying, when you create something, you name it. How is that not the same concept, And that resonated with me because I was like, I created a blog recently and I was like, I got to name this thing. So I had to come up with a name and I was like, okay, I guess I'll go my last name something like blog or I don't even know, But so it's common in our lives, but for some reason it's not. Yeah, I guess people haven't given it much thought or we haven't really thought about it. Do you know, I actually had a random question and I think I may know the answer to it, but I named one of my contracts recently. So I have a fully on-chain photography collection and I just gave it a name because one, I wanted to get the Poe app. That was kind of the main driver. The other one was this is cool tech. I want to do it. I want to be supportive of this idea because I totally agree with it. Does it update on the Etherscan side of things? So will people let's say someone's gonna how do I phrase it, I guess? So if I minted a new piece and it's an auction, when someone buys it, will it actually be reflected in all the other apps, in Etherscan or on OpenSea? Or is that also part of the challenge as well that you're facing is they need to also, I guess, recognize that resolve the name that it has a name and it don't show the hex kind of thing?
So there's kind of, I guess, two sort of components to this. One part is what we call primary names for ENS names. And so if you think about an ENS name, there's effectively two parts to it, right? You have the forward resolving name, which is, it could be gramoho.eth or contract or myapp.gramoho.eth. That goes to, hex address 0x123, followed by 37 other characters, and then you have then you have what's called the reverse resolving name, and so this is where you actually to have that hex address, and then that's 0x123, and that resolves back to myapp.gramoho.eth. And for both, if you have both of those things set, then you have what's called a primary name on ENS, and so that means is that what that means is when someone has say Block Explorer, for instance, or a wallet, they encounter a contract hex address, they can call the ENS reverse registry and get the ENS name back from it. But that only works if you've got this thing called a primary name set. And there are limitations in the ENS protocol currently on contract primary naming, in that there are ways in which you can set both of those records in terms of both ways, but there isn't sort of a way you can do it for everything. So to kind of unpack that a bit more, you can have an ENS name point to anything, but that reverse record going from the contract address back to the ENS name that can only be set in certain situations. And so that can create some challenges for resolving the name. Now, where we are right now, such a small proportion of contracts are named, we're in the 0.00 somethings of a percent in terms of the proportion of contracts that are named. And one of the things we're actually going to be releasing very soon is just some analytic dashboards with June that kind of show, really kind of call home how small a proportion of contracts are named. So there are some sort of technical challenges there, but that's stuff that we are working to resolve and figure out, best way forward at the protocol level of the ENS. But then the other part part of it is the integration with the different, providers, your block explorers like Etherscan and BlockScout, your wallets like MetaMask, Rainbow, and, various other ones. And the support for ENS is generally good there. Like if you have a primary name set for a smart contract, you will see that in Etherscan. And I haven't checked, but I'd imagine BlockScout as well. But if you only have the forward resolving record as in, that one direction lookup, then it likely won't show up there, just because anyone can create a record that points to any contract address. So you could, I don't know, you could come up with any ENS name and you could have it pointing to, say, official Uniswap contracts or whatever else. But the way it's designed is that for that reverse record, only Uniswap could, claim what's called the reverse record. So you know which one's true. So that is a challenge. But at the same time, it's not, none of this stuff's insurmountable. It's more about us just having ongoing dialogue to figure out the best way forward. But in the meantime, even having a single forward name is better than no name. You think about DNS on the internet, right? People are accustomed to having a web address to take them to a website. They're not so fussed about the reverse lookup. And whilst it's not quite, the same analogy between that sort of Web 2 mental model and Web 3, our view is any name is better than no name. And the way Enscribe's been set up is that if a contract can have a primary name set, it will get set. If it can't, you still use it to name your contract.
Yeah. I know that was the experience that I had, where I think I couldn't go back. Like I couldn't set up the reverse, but I could do the forward, and it still let me kind of name it, which was fine. Like, like for me, it was like, it's early days on this. I was like, I was down to try it. Have there been any, I know you mentioned a Dune dashboard, like do you have any insights like from going live now for the last like 6+ months, like on the types of people, behaviors, like who are the kinds of people naming it, or, like, is it, I mean, I'm guessing it's like early adopters, but any insights there, on like early usage and behavior?
So at the moment, it is, it's just very much so that early adopter camp, and often people involved in the ENS ecosystem. And I think part of this reason, it's always comes down to this idea, developers are lazy. I mean that in the positive sense, in that they want to automate everything. And so ways in which, we can incorporate naming into the deployment workflow is a really important way to make that happen. I see there has kind of been two main routes there to really, build the proper momentum. One is that if you can convince some high profile, whether it's DAOs or projects, to actually, use the platform to name their contracts, and then ensure that that's being reflected in the wallets. So that's one part, but then the other part is just making it easy for people to do that. So that's ensuring that at the point of deployment in the main dev tools that it's feasible. And we're lucky in that there's kind of a precedent with contract verification services like via Sourcify, Etherscan, BlockScout. I think the Verifier Alliance as well. They're kind of trying to really standardize this stuff, but that's a similar kind of thing in that people want to see more than just bytes associated with contracts. They want to be able to know that the source code of the contract exists. They can look at it. Yes, not your average user, but certainly people who are more technically focused. And so hence, it's very normal when people use tools such as Foundry or Hardhat to do their deployments. They also do a verification there as well. Typically it is still Etherscan or Sourcifier, kind of the main two that are used. But that is kind of, if we tag on naming onto that as well, that's kind of a good way to do it. And so we've got it working with Foundry, but we are having a bit of back and forth with the team in terms of, when you're the new kid on the block, it's like people aren't willing to necessarily just, let you go all in and just sort of, put stuff into like, the technology. That's more a feature of how Foundry has been designed, but we're going to be, we have Base's on-chain toolkit, which we're going to be starting work on an integration very soon with. We are going to be integrating with Hardhat as well, and also Remix too. Very, very positive conversation there with the team recently about that. So that's the key part of it. for us is to make sure we've got those integrations. So when you've got the people creating the contracts, you're able to feed in the name piece of it in addition to what we provide with the app. So I think the app's where you can. It's almost easier to start with the app so that people can go through the experience. You can figure out what are the good integrations, how you can surface the information. But to actually make it easy, you've kind of got to go to where the contracts are being deployed rather than trying to say, hey, come and use our app to deploy your contracts. Because that was kind of our starting point with Enscribe. But I think, the reality is people don't want to have to use a different app to deploy a contract. Even if it comes with an ENS name, they'd rather stick to what they've got. And then then afterwards potentially, try and persuade them to name their contract on our platform or just use the tools that they already do.
Yeah, no, I would agree. I feel like almost the app side of it is probably what also will get you just casual users to be aware of it as well. Because I know I just launched a Clanker recently and it had been a while. And that whole flow is really nice on their interface, for launching a token. And it already captures the data of my ENS name that I'm the one that launched it. When the flow is either I'm about to hit deploy or I don't know when, but it would just be hey, do you want to name this thing with your ENS? It would just be a good, because they have a little checkbox of do you want to put some in a vesting account, so a Sablier or some kind of a hedgy kind of account where it gets locked up. So they have a nice little checklist of for deploying a token, and just add another step of do you want to name it and tie it to your ENS. I would have been yeah, and then if people get curious about it, then they're aware of it at least, or know that that's possible. Let's see, because I know we have another 30 minutes. Do you foresee a world where verified contracts are kind of prioritized inside of wallets or explorers? So the example I think about is kind of Farcaster. They're leaning into social, kind of social credibility or social proof of when tokens get launched, you're able to see who the kind of who created it, and who else has bought it within the ecosystem. So you're kind of there's social credit back to it essentially. But do you see it also being kind of prioritized from the user experience as well, in apps, if it's verified, then it's good, it will show it, and it'll kind of they kind of do that now. When I go to Matcha, sometimes they'll say hey, make sure you trust this actual token, because we don't know, they give you a little carve out, so if it's linked and everything, then you're that goes away kind of. Do you foresee a world like that?
I think that it kind of comes down to staying true to the sort of decentralized roots of Ethereum and the various L2s versus whether you end up with super apps that kind of control too much of the experience. Because there's always going to be sort of compromises with either approach, right? One is that we have these we're in this place where it's people just have their wallets. They then typically interact directly with contracts, and wallets might have a sort of garden of recommended dApps and so on. But when it comes to the transactional experience, it's still very much so staying true to the Web3 ethos, in that it's using a non-custodial wallet, and that the users are kind of free to kind of connect to whatever dApps they want. Whereas, you have that other side, which is where you have a much more integrated experience, which is more seamless for users, but then a lot of the detail is kind of abstracted away to the point where, you can just work with the apps easily within their walled garden. But then if you look to go outside of that, then it's made quite hard. And, I think in that sort of case, which is obviously the more profitable one for any, companies to go after, it also is the one that kind of risks the decentralization that Web3 networks kind of stand for at their heart as well. Because if you effectively limit what people can do in their wallets, say just to pre-selected apps, then you don't need to necessarily show them the details of what's happening behind the scenes. They don't necessarily need to see the details of the smart contracts or the before they sign a transaction, because it just gets abstracted away. And so there is kind of there is, of course, risk with that in the way that what we saw happen with the web, in that, once upon a time, everyone just went to different websites as they wanted to. But then over time, it kind of grew into the App Store. And then all of a sudden, people are just using their phones to use the pre-selected apps. And behind the scenes, Apple's providing all of the plumbing. And so, yeah, it's a playbook we've seen play out. Hopefully history won't repeat itself too directly again in that respect with Web3, but that's definitely a big risk to it all, because the easiest way to hide complexity is to just create your own walled garden, and you decide what people can do in it.
Yeah, no, totally agree on that. Yeah, I think I've been seeing more like a spectrum of like onboarding, and it's like it starts off like centralized exchange, like that's about as much as your crypto journey kind of just starts and ends there. And then it's like, as you keep going, it's like self-custodial wallets, like, social. And then you keep going to like down to like the DeFi land and like decentralized like interfaces. And, so essentially like no one can, or immutable contracts as well, like no changes, like it's all clear rules. And yeah, you just keep going down the rabbit hole. I know, like for me, like, well, I guess the reason what brought me to crypto was a lot of the decentralization and kind of like the big FU to like institutional, the things that we had. So I always tend to lean further away from the centralized ideas. It is nice though, from like a user experience, like you said, to be in the wall garden sometimes. Let's see. So I saw a post on the ENS DAO regarding kind of like incentives, and going back a little bit on the DAO side of things. So like, myself, like I own a noun, and one of the things I'm trying to work on now is like getting buy-in from everybody to name our contracts, to actually use Enscribe to go name our contracts. We have a couple contracts, just makes sense for us to name, in my opinion. And I saw that there was like a post about incentivizing folks to like do this activity essentially. Yeah, I wanted to kind of get your takes on that whole post on like, incentivizing the right behaviors from ENS, because I feel like even sometimes I still encounter apps nowadays where I think it's less now, like where ENS is definitely like there for sure, like it resolves, but there are some times where I'm like, it's not doing it, and I'm like, what the hell's going on? Like, I need to go copy and paste it. Like, what do you mean you don't accept my .eth as an address? But yeah, I wanted to get your take on kind of like incentivization and what are your thoughts on that with Enscribe and yeah.
So the post came about from FireEyes, who's the largest ENS delegate. So effectively has the most voting power on the ENS DAO, which is still, we're still not talking like tens of percent, but it's still enough to have be their opinion is it's meaningful when they say stuff on this, because how certainly the ENS DAO is really the first one I've started to really pay a lot more attention to for obvious reasons. But a lot of the time, it's delegates with significant, who have more influence on the DAOs. People tend to pay more attention to what they say. So it's the point that they were making was effectively that the ENS treasury is, it's got a very large treasury of ENS tokens. I think the ballpark is somewhere around like $1 billion. So it's a good sized war chest there. And why don't they create some incentives for people to do more on ENS? So within the ENS ecosystem, they do have a number of different kind of working groups, and certainly the two that quite positive for builders generally in Web3. One is you have their public goods working group, which effectively gives grants to public goods projects. They don't have to be ENS aligned, but it's just ones who are doing good impactful things in Ethereum. And then you also have the ecosystem working group, which also has grants there. But again, that's much more about projects building on ENS. And kind of related to that, you have what's called the service providers program as well, which is about funding, projects who are really helping ENS grow. But I believe, and this is an area where I'd need to double check my facts, but generally anyway, certain, I know for sure that some of that funding comes directly from the revenue associated with ENS name, purchases and renewals. That's kind of where it is. And then in the meantime, you have a whole load of tokens sitting there, which are being managed by the Treasury. And so the point here was that, can we start deploying some of those? A great example, as a case in point, has been things like Optimism's retro public goods funding rounds, where they've spent a significant amount of their, well, not a significant amount in terms of, as a proportion of their entire treasury, but in terms of, enough to be very impactful for a number of teams building on that ecosystem. And so that was really the point the FireEyes was making about, well, could we have some similar sorts of incentives with the ENS? And so some of this was about, could be incentivizing some Web2 projects to do some, collaborations or, work more with ENS. I can't remember all of them off the top of my head. But
no worries. I'll link it so people can go check out that blog post, or like the post, and they can also figure out like some of the other projects. But I did find it kind of cool that like you guys came up, and I was like, I don't know what that number is. I'll let people figure out what the financial incentive is. But like, I think that's super cool. Like if they even did like 50 cents, I would be like, just get people to name stuff. Like also builds that muscle, and then like brings awareness, and also tells people like, hey, this is possible. We should be asking all of our apps, everyone, whoever we can. Like I know now, like that's, once I found out about you guys, like, I was like, hey, I've been asking everyone. I was like, hey man, can you name this? So
it's great. It's great to see the validation from, coming from one of the delegates there, just because they, like as you're saying there, they just like where we're coming, how we're approaching this. And I do see like naming contracts as being a big potential unlock for ENS, because, we've got tens of millions of contracts, maybe even hundreds of millions that could potentially be named. And so, there's some good reasons there to, embrace ENS for that. So there's that side. But then, when it comes to the incentives, it's just, it's that challenge with, well, part of it, of course, is that it's a DAO. So, you've got to get support from, a lot of stakeholders. But the other side is, what is a way of doing this that can be meaningful for just, actually ensuring that we see ultimately widespread naming, but we have a sort of economic system around any tokens there that can't be gamed too easily. So it's like, do we say something up front like, well, if you take these actions, then you get X amount of ENS, or is it done like in a retroactive thing? And it's just trying to figure out what are sort of good ways forward there. And it's certainly a discussion that's started now, and we just need to start making progress with it. But it's very cool to get that sort of buy-in from the delegates and the community as well. There's certainly been a good response there.
All right, let's take a quick break. I hope you're enjoying the episode. This episode was made possible with the support of my premium subscribers, Seattle Dog, Mike Vinyls, Brennan. If you'd like to receive exclusive drops, access to token-gated content, make sure to subscribe to my Hypersub. Also, make sure to join our Telegram chat. Links all below. If you don't want to subscribe, that's fine too. You can mint this episode on pods.media. Think of it as like a tip. You can tip me as well. It's available on all major platforms. Yeah, let's get back to it. Yeah, I mean, you got my vote. I don't have that much, but you got my vote.
We'll get it.
I think we should name it. Like you said, like definitely would want to like keep an eye on like people gaming it or doing, funky business kind of stuff. But people will come out of the woodwork for sure. But yeah, I think it's like it would get the wheel going, and like people would start doing it, and it becomes more commonplace. And I think it'd be a net positive, for everyone to do that. Even like I had a Cap from the namespace team on here as well.
Yeah.
Even like subnames too, like subdomain names. Like I feel like that still feels like no one's taking advantage of it. Other than maybe like I know Base has and a couple other ones, but like I feel like I would love to see like the more Shi-Fi. I think that's the name of that group. More smaller communities, like I've even thought about it for like nouns, like nouns would be a perfect candidate to have like a, because we have people that come in and like will leave a comment or vote or like, and it's just that hex address. And I'm like, dude, who is this person?
Yeah.
Like, I just need to know like name wise, like you can call yourself Bob Marley for all I care. At least now you're just Bob Marley for the rest of my life, like on this forum.
Yeah.
Versus,
And it's fun seeing the names people come up with as well, right? Because you just like
yeah.
you talk to like your spouse or just people outside about this person you're chatting with on Telegram or X
Yeah.
or whatever else when they're the alias they're using there. It's it's that extra layer of it all. It's fun.
She my poor wife, I'll be like, yeah, I'm talking to Humpty, and she's like, who? And then I finally meet these people in real life, and she's with me, and I'm like, it's Humpty, and she's like, no, what's his real name? And I'm like, no clue, it's Humpty.
Yeah, that's it. I'm good with
exactly. Let's see, I had another one. Yeah, I actually had a question regarding like audits and like reputations on smart contracts, and like, do you see like some kind of use case around that for your team? I know you kind of mentioned a little bit of like, decentralization and like, you don't want to be, maybe you don't want to have that role at all, but like, have you thought about that? Maybe like everyone has audit, like, like there's some smart contracts that have been audited. They have these reports. So on top of naming their contract, like, is there a way to like maybe even link set audits and then being like, and then I don't know, like I'll leave it up to all the people that are better at designing and thinking about this, but like, like, is there a way to kind of surface that, so like when then I'm doing a transaction, it's like, hey, you're interacting with uniswap.app.eth, whatever, app.uniswap.eth, and here's what it's doing. And then like maybe there's a way to surface to all the audits that it's like gone through. So then like, you're kind of starting to build a little bit like as an end user, you're like, okay, I know I'm interacting with the right app. I know I'm interacting. It has a ton of audits. I mean, obviously up for debate, like maybe someone can somehow fake all this stuff, but like, do you see Enscribe maybe tapping into that a little bit, like going down that path? Or is that like, you're like, hey, one thing at a time?
No, I mean,
all the contracts.
It's definitely something we've thought a lot about. And because, fundamentally, when we strip everything back, with everything we do, it comes back to the question of, can this make Ethereum safer for the users? Like, by having this kind of this broader mission, it's like it makes all of these decisions a lot easier for us because we kind of strip things back to think in those terms. And so, smart contracts, that's not just about naming. We think that naming is kind of like the biggest uplift we can kind of get for free, and that we're not waiting for like a big, we're not waiting for like the next Ethereum protocol upgrade or anything else. It's like everything's there now. People just need to do it. So that's why it's such a key thing, because it just it's a no-brainer in our view. But there's 100%. There's other things as well, and so. One of the ways I thought about this was like with the the TLS padlock that you have in Web 2, which I think it's this idea of what it stands for, that it means this thing, this website. Sure, in the TLS padlock, it's about secure communication between the front end that you're dealing with and then the back end for transmitting information. But it also kind of signifies safety for users, and so that's definitely been an area that we've kind of spent quite a lot of time thinking about. And so, once we added the contract naming capabilities to Enscribe, so the first thing was to be able to deploy and name contracts through the platform, but then just name contracts. We then added search functionality, so you can view contracts and you can see information about them. And that's quite key to us, because we want to get to a point where what we show in Enscribe is very useful information, just to indicate to people, should I be okay dealing with a smart contract? Of course, the long-term view we'd love is that that becomes the standard place everyone goes to before they sign a transaction. But that's kind of how we're thinking about it. And so the first thing we did, beyond naming, the first thing we did was add contract verifications in terms of, has this contract been verified with Sourcify, Etherscan, or BlockScout? Because anyone with good sort of contract hygiene should be doing that. And by kind of aggregating across those kind of three main sources as well, we think that that's quite important, because it doesn't matter so much if, sure, I've got a preference for people to use Sourcify because of, what they're doing. But at the same time, a lot of people still verify with Etherscan. So, we trust Etherscan. So as long as, it's named in one of those two places, verified in one of those two places, fine. Then the next level of that is, of course, audits, right? Now, we were certainly having conversations with auditors and talking to teams about that. But we have found that there are other teams working on this stuff, and specifically we haven't actually done the integration yet, but this is certainly on our roadmap. That there's, trying to remember what the name of the company is, but anyway, there's effectively, I think it's TrustBlock. Like they're basically aggregating together like audit data, and so our view as a starting point is to integrate with them and then see how the information looks. Does that kind of provide what we need from an audit perspective? Because audits are an interesting one. We spoke to some auditing firms, to say, well, could we, off the back of if this contract's been audited, have something that's as powerful as the TLS padlock or a check mark to say this should be a safe contract? Some of them said, yeah, that sounds cool. Others said, no, because we don't want to be responsible for, any problems with these smart contracts, because some of these people who come to us, their contracts, they're not following like good code hygiene. They just want us to sort of say, yeah, it's okay. But then they don't have good test coverage on their contracts. And, they don't want to be held liable for it. So, which makes sense in that, it's not the silver bullet, unfortunately. And so we're kind of working on that assumption that audits are definitely very useful additive information to have. But at the same time, you can't get to the point of a binary decision for the end user to say, should I trust this or not, just on the fact of if a firm has audited it. And so we think the way forward is, we'll have that integration there. People can see it in Enscribe in a similar way that we've added the open labels integration in there. So we're kind of aggregating together the information that people can better inform them. I'd love us to get to that point of having something that's such a powerful indicator that says, yes, it's safe, or no, it's not. But I don't think we're there yet. And in the meantime, there's enough to do just to get people naming their contracts and making them safer. But building on this, so whilst yes, we're not able at this point, it feels like, to have this standardized "this is safe" thing, we are seeing some, what we think could be some really good opportunities, more about trying to create sort of what is effectively more of a DApp or contract registry on ENS. Within the ENS DAO, or the ENS ecosystem, one of the other initiatives right now is all about serving up DAO-specific metadata for DAOs, so that you can kind of, you can go to a DAO's record in ENS and you can get all this sort of information associated with the DAO there. And we're thinking, well, what about having, a lot of this key smart contract metadata linked via ENS records as well? So using a similar sort of thing. So then, what you could have is you have, my app.eth, and then associated with that specific subname, you could have records pointing to the license. What's the GitHub repo where the code is? What's the website this should be running off? What's the content hash for it running, on the DWeb somewhere? And so, that could, maybe, evolves into a full-blown app registry built on ANS. I mean, we're constantly iterating and thinking and moving with, sort of evolving our direction here. But I think that there's definitely a lot of scope to really, increase the surface area of how much information people see about dApps and smart contracts in a way that's kind of aligned with ENS, but also more broadly Ethereum. So it's not just, here's a hex address, signed transaction. It's like there's all this other information you can see about it, whether it's source code verifications, audit reports, OLI labels, whatever else, and then also all this useful metadata there. And if you can bring all that together, then you start to have something that looks like a much more solid kind of foundation for working with decentralized apps.
Yeah, no, it's great to hear you say even some of the other examples, because my brain was kind of stuck on the audits from the padlock example, but even like kind of the way that we're doing it now, where there's like other indicators or signals that you can use to like bring up your trust levels. Like it's not just like who, and that they have an audit, but like even like signals like how many times it's been engaged with or interacted with, like, like that would be like a strong signal. So like if someone was somehow able to like duplicate or make it like a similar looking ENS name to try and trick people, I mean, like the signal would be like, you have the audit, the social stuff, like the social in terms of like how many like times it's been activated or used or something. I don't know like what those KPIs are, but like then it starts really building like a cohesive like story. Like this is the real one, this is a fake one. Obviously, you can fake on-chain transactions and stuff like that, but like we're getting down to like a smaller pool of people that are going to put this much work into a scam. I guess they exist out there for sure, but it's like a smaller one. But yeah, like it was great to hear you say like it's not even just audits, like there's other signal indicators too that we can do. And whether it's like you guys or ENS or someone else too, I think it's going to be great for the ecosystem overall. But yeah, great to hear. What's a milestone that you guys are, we're what? It's August, mid-August. What's like a milestone for you guys that you have? Like, where do you want to be like next March? 1 year anniversary, obviously I'm not going to hold you to anything. It's just like, I want to know like where you want to be, you specifically, or the team.
I think there's of course the roadmap's evolving, and there's based on feedback and everything else, things do change. But we definitely, in the more immediate term, we're going to be making available at least a June analytics dashboard that's focused on contract naming. We're just kind of making sure that the information seems accurate that we're collecting. So we've got that kind of North Star for us, because for that's the metric that really matters. It's like, what is the proportion of smart contracts that have ENS names associated with them? Primary names being the kind of key one. So that's a big one. And whilst it's not a lot of work, it's more having that and seeing, being able to actually see progress against that. Because if I'm being honest, we're not at a point yet where we've got hundreds of people naming contracts every day, when they deploy it. I think with contract verifications, I think at best you're probably looking at about 10%. Well, actually, it's probably more like 5 to 10% of all contracts are verified. Getting to that in the next few years would be an awesome thing for contract naming. Of course, we want to aim for 100%, but I think if we can at least have something similar to verifications, that's something that's seems feasible. So yeah, there's those metrics. We want to get these dev tool integrations live as well, and so I'd hope by March we've got a few of them out the door there, and we're starting to see stuff happen off the back of that. With regards to primary naming for all contracts, this is kind of like a passion thing that we have, that we want to find a way to do this, but we've got to also tread carefully with it as well, because whilst there are limitations with ENS, it's not like you can just make big changes to ENS on a whim, because it has implications for the whole protocol there. But I'd hope that come March, we at least we have a way that we've started work, and maybe even got some stuff live there in terms of setting the headway for that side. The other thing though too, which you touched on earlier, was these kind of token incentives. Having done our first kind of initiative there before March to bring people on and incentivize them would be awesome. One of the things we're actually working on at the moment is a dashboard kind of to Enscribe as well. So, you have that core functionality, but when you actually land on Enscribe, you can see details of who's naming their contracts, who are the projects that are doing it, and this sort of stuff, just to get people a bit more excited and adding that level of gamification. So yeah. I think that those are kind of the big ones. Certainly in terms of collaborations, no, I think the thing would be getting some notable projects having named their contracts with Enscribe by then, because that's what's going to really, I think, build the awareness more than anything, if people start to see that. So that's, by March, that would definitely be a big win for us. I don't think we'd have convinced, all the wallet providers necessarily to support Enscribe by then. I think that'll come later, but at the same time, it's the momentum, right? And this stuff compounds, and when you're starting from zero, it takes time, but we're good with that, because we believe in what we're doing.
Yeah, no, you've been in this space for a long time too, so I'm betting. Yeah, it's gonna compound really quickly, I suspect. So I'm trying to be conscious about time. Want to say thanks for doing this. I did want to ask you one more question. Hopefully your wife is okay with it. But
We've got time if we need.
Okay, cool. All right. So I have a question. It's a weird one, but this initially all got started with, it used to be called like bite-sized information. So I don't know if you know what a pincho is, but it's like a Spanish kind of tapa, but from like the fast region. But
Right.
anyways, I've asked every guest, what is their favorite snack? So that is the hard-hitting question. Favorite snack. No repercussions either, too. There's no like gaining weight in this world. Nothing of that nature.
So when we're saying snack, are we talking about like just, meal, or is it like if you just need like a sort of, pick me up, or
definitely not a meal, so not a meal replacement, but so up to you how much of a big snack we're talking about. I've done like taco, so hypothetically if you ate 5 tacos, that's like a meal, but like one, it's a snack. Yeah, so not a meal replacement. That's my definition of it. Not a meal replacement.
Okay, so I know what so at some of the Pakistani like restaurants you have here in London, like there's a big, you've got sort of Bangladeshi, Pakistani, and like Indian sort of communities who, they I think it was in the 50s or 60s, like there's a lot of people migrated here, but it's also like a big part of British culture. And again, I think it's the Pakistani style, but you get these amazing grilled lamb chops, and it's like they're just there's a place that's called Tyabs, in which I'm presuming it's still going in East London, and they just that was like that's like the best thing, where there'd always be queues to get in there. You go inside, and like the thing you order is the grilled lamb chops, because they come out on a sizzling platter. And they're really nice and spicy as well. So it's like you've got that sort of good spice hit, and it's like just really delicious, like lamb. It's I never have too many of those.
There you go. That sounds really good, actually. That's good. Someone gave me carrots and hummus earlier, and I was like, guy, that's the one thing you chose, carrots and hummus. Just kidding. All right. So yeah, thanks again for doing it. Where should people go? I think people should go to Enscribe with an E.
Yeah, that's it. Enscribe.xyz, and I'm actively posting and talking about Enscribe every day on X as well, and reposting stuff on Firecaster too. So that's just Conor Svensson x.com Conor Svensson. I'm sure we can link to that easily enough.
Yeah, I'll link your account, the Enscribe one. There's a POAP still going, I believe, right?
Yeah, definitely. We've got our limited POAP drop for our early Enscribe, as we're calling them. So if you name your contract now, you can claim one of those while they're still available.
Yeah, exactly. There you go. That's what got me. I'm telling you, it's hilarious. I'm a simple man. I saw POAP and I was like, hey, this is cool. I'm gonna do it.
Nice.
If you're hearing this message, you've listened to the entire episode, and for that, I want to thank you for making it to the end. As mentioned before, this episode's available on Pods to download and collect. If you are on Pods, make sure to subscribe from your favorite Web2 app or podcasting app, as I post episodes there. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to leave us a review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, or just share it with your friends or anyone that might be interested in this. Hit me up if you have any specific people or topics you want me to get in touch with or cover. Make sure to check out the show notes and reach us out on social media. See you guys next time.